Good morning, all. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining local author, Kitchener-based author Jennifer Farquhar and myself. My name is David Worsley. I'm the co-owner of Wordsworth Books. We are here today to tip a hat to both to Jennifer and to Canadian Independent Bookstore Day. In years past, that has meant, among other things, authors interacting in a very real way with bookstores, selling books, doing readings, meeting customers, and in some cases, memorably, showing off their own retail chops, actually getting them behind the counter, which, well, is always a highlight. This year, alas, things are a little different. However, one of the real joys of owning and operating an indie bookstore is to get to know authors that are in your own neck of the woods. A few years ago, Jennifer Farquhar published WATERMARK. It is a novel that has stayed with me since its publication in the spring, I think, of 2018. And I've always wanted to, chew the fat with you, as it were, Jennifer. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for, for a hell of a first book and for diving into the writing life.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me and supporting me in this way. It's such a pleasure to talk about writing and books.
Let's start by talking about writing and books. A bit of history, perhaps. Jennifer, you are a parent. You're an educator. You are also now a writer. What was balancing all of that like?
Oh, great question. So yes, so I have 3 kids who were pretty young when I decided to start being a serious writer, I guess, about 6 years ago. And I'm a half-time teacher. So yeah, it is a bit of a juggling act. I had to figure out how to squeeze a few hours of writing in. Most days, I usually try to write 6 days a week. So usually that has meant getting up pretty early in the morning to write, or or revising really late at night. But and now I'm on parental leave right now, so it's a little bit more relaxed. So usually my husband takes the kids for a few hours in the morning and I get my writing done, and then I'm on mom duty for the rest of the day. So yeah, I've managed to juggle it, but I can't say that I have many spare minutes. If you ask me what TV shows I watch, I would be hard pressed to come up with a title. So yeah.
Oddly enough, that was not going to be one of the questions, but thank you anyway. So I gather that's the way with a lot of writers. They're working at 5 in the morning or at 1 in the morning because everything else runs in between. 3 kids. I gather they're all, well, youngish. They're not moving out of the house anytime soon.
No, yeah. Well, there are 3, soon to be 4, and 10 and 14. So yeah, it's mainly the 3-year-old who requires my constant attention. But yeah, when I started writing, there were only 2 kids when I started writing, but they were little. And so yeah, that is a challenge for sure to find that balance between feeling like you're being a good mom, but also doing something for yourself, finding your own passion and making time for it every day. So that was something that I committed to. It was a birthday present I gave myself when I turned 40, was that I was finally going to start carving out time for this writing career that my entire life I envisioned myself having, but I just always kind of waited and thought, well, I'll wait until I have time. And then I realized I'm never going to have time unless I make it. So that's been my commitment to myself. And I really have stuck to that. I'm really disciplined about making sure I get that time in, even if it means I have to hire a part-time babysitter for a few hours a week. I've kind of figured out different ways that I can get a couple hours of childcare every morning so that I can get the writing in.
Sure. The economics behind it are all, well, pretty punishing, aren't they? So in your 20s and 30s, let's say, you grew up in Northern Ontario, yeah?
I did. I grew up on Manitoulin Island.
On the island, actually. So yeah, WATERMARK. And any pronunciation mistakes for proper nouns or names made up or otherwise are entirely my own. Mikinaak Island? Mikinaak, thank you. Mikinaak Island.
Mikinaak.
Is what?
So Mikinaak Island is an island in Lake Huron, and it's basically a thinly veiled Manitoulin Island in a lot of ways. The landscape and the people, the demographics, the culture of the settler, white culture, living alongside an indigenous Anishinaabe culture. That's all something that I drew from my own childhood and young life growing up on Manitoulin Island. So yeah, and I turned it into a slightly different island called Mikinaak Island in Lake Huron.
Watermark for me, pretty much right away, hit the sweet spot. Literary merit, there is character depth and development and different arcs, and it is a literary novel. But my God, is there gas in the tank? It runs like a deer. And
thank you.
Well, no, thank you. The notion of place, the idea of a sense of place, always carries the day. I think particularly in Canadian fiction, we are so vast a country. There's so many different landscapes and geologies, et cetera, that you really nailed a whole lot of things that just made the place work. What is it about water specifically? Because water is a metaphor for the entire novel. It's ideal, it's malevolence, it's sense of good and bad and foreboding and comfort and all that good stuff. Were you a swimmer at age 3? how much of this was inside?
Well, you really nailed it. I'm not sure how much I can add to that theme of water, but you're absolutely right. It runs throughout the book, and this great force that is the lake surrounding the island is what these people who grew up on the island, it's in their blood. Everything about their life, be it summer or winter, is about interacting with the water or the ice. And so that was it, for me writing it. I felt like the water was almost a character in and of itself. But yes, growing up on Manitoulin Island, I also had a very water heavy life. Like our lives did revolve around the water. And so that's in my 20s when I kind of started thinking about this Canadian novel that I one day wanted to write. I always knew that water would be at the core of the book. I knew I wanted it to take place in a small town where the people's lives were greatly affected by the water in both good ways and bad.
So without giving too much away, read the book, folks. There is a mother-daughter. There's a mother-son angle, and there's a familial angle through a couple of generations. There are one or two, tragedies, disappearances, in which the water is central, of course. And there are, my goodness, there are lies, there are sins of omission, there are big reveals that are connected to a landscape and connected to a culture, both, as you say, settler and indigenous. And we're going to get into that a little bit later as well. That's a lot to carry in your 20s. I loved in addition to the book, I loved the notion of who you had to thank. And it was almost a narrative to who you had to thank, because there were building blocks to how Watermark came to be. Let's start here. You're carrying this around at, let's say, 22. What do 15 years of sitting with an idea look like?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I spent a ton of time for 15 years processing the book, but it was always back there. But once I became a teacher with summers off, I did start dabbling, because I'm a major plotter when it comes to writing. There's the two groups of writers, the plotters and the pantsers, and I'm definitely a type A personality plotter. And so for many summers in a row, I would go back to my set of cue cards and start just brainstorming about what I imagined this book would look like, and what the characters would look like. But then I would get busy in the rest of the school year, and I would kind of forget about this book. And then summer again, I would have more time, and I'd whip out the cue cards and I would make more notes. But like I said, it wasn't until I turned 40 that I sat down and started writing chapter 1.
Okay, so let's say you have a first or second draft of a manuscript. You and I have a mutual acquaintance in the form of Adrian Kerr. There are a couple of people I'd like to ask about. Adrian is one of them. Adrian was a sales rep. I only knew her. as a sales rep for a major Canadian publisher. She was a woman who had read everything and could distill it down to the nut. She could nail a plot point in 30 seconds and inhabit an entire book, it seemed. This book is about X. This is why it's special. And this is why you should read it, which is really all that book selling is. Hey, what's good out there? Well, this one, because X. Go. That's really all there is to it. And she nailed that shut.
Yes, you've
you
described her wonderfully. Sorry.
No, please. No, that's who she is. But you know her as what?
As my editor, as my first editor. Yes. So sorry. Yeah, I forgot that was part of your question before, is who did I have to thank and who did I work with? And yes, so Adrienne Kerr, my agent connected me with her. This is when I had a Canadian agent. Before we went on submission to publishers, she said, Adrienne will be so helpful. Because this is the process that usually happens with a debut novelist, is that you get the book as ready as you can possibly get it before you go on submission to publishers. So I was connected with Adrienne and I was blown away. I've never met someone whose editorial mind works like that. Like you say, she understands story. So she took this book and she could immediately see what its strengths were, but also what its weaknesses were, and gave me so much incredible guidance on how to make this book better. So I worked with her. And then it went back into the hands of my agent, and then my agent put it on submission to publishers, and we eventually found Latitude 46 as our publisher, which was such a day of celebration when that contract was signed.
Oh my goodness! I remember seeing a catalog, and it was from it was an outfit called the Literary Press Group, I believe. And I'm going back a few years here; I could be off on that. But it's my understanding, pardon me, that Latitude 46 is a publisher under the umbrella of the Literary Press Group. And I remember seeing the catalog. Yeah. Oh, and the author lives in Kitchener. Oh, cool. And the sales rep at the time said, oh, yeah, you guys should do something. Oh, well, all right, great. And that's how I got the book. I did not, however, know anything about Latitude 46. What do they have a mandate? Have they been around for a while? What's their story?
Yes, I think they've been around for 10 years now. I think they just celebrated their 10th birthday, and their mandate is that they focus on stories from the North or authors from Northern Ontario. And they've been amazing in how many books they've been able to publish a year. They publish a handful of books twice a year, I believe. And and so if you're a Northern Ontario author or have Northern roots, or if the content of your book is related in some way to the North, that's what they're looking for.
Okay. And you are in a rather unique position here, insofar as in the last few years, there has been a great reckoning in Canada and the States with Indigenous fiction. There are now exponentially more Indigenous voices at play here, really at play, as opposed to just being around the margins and, oh, isn't that cute? Somebody wrote a book who is, not white anymore. How nice. No. There is a lot of Indigenous fiction that is really punching above their weight and getting into the very core of things. You have a unique perspective on some of this. Tell me about growing up on Manitoulin in terms of the people there.
Yes, so Manitoulin has a large Anishinaabe Indigenous population, and so growing up, we had one school in my town, and probably 30% of the kids at our school were Indigenous. I'm not Indigenous, so it was just pretty organic that we just all intermingled. So when I went to write this book, I took that same demographic, and the main character is also this white woman who's grown up with lots of Indigenous friends and seen the different racial tensions between the two groups, and has learned the legends and the stories that come out of the Indigenous culture. And so she's rubbing up against that and encountering that in her own way. And but then me as an author, it was it did create some challenges when we went to look at publishing, because you do have to be so sensitive about being a white woman publishing a book that has a lot of Indigenous content and that touches on Indigenous legends, and figuring out a way to do that respectfully. So we did have quite a process. I mean, I feel like my book has always come from a place of respect and knowledge. I mean, I grew up in this place that I've sketched. But we did go through, we had an Indigenous professor from Sudbury read the book to give us feedback about anything that might be offensive or anything that wasn't included, or just her general opinions. And then I had another Indigenous sensitivity reader from Manitoulin Island, who's a principal of an elementary school, also read it and give us that same kind of feedback, just to really make sure that just to make sure that we were aware of anything that might be problematic. And both of them enjoyed the book and gave me great feedback. And then we went from there. Our publisher Latitude 46 is also very involved with looking at Indigenous writing and stuff. So they were already very aware of being very culturally sensitive and coming from a place of respect.
Nice. And there's a point in the book, I mean, myths and legends and Indigenous stories are in many ways the backbone of the book too, without getting too much into it. Again, buy the book, kids. But they are dealt with very respectfully. And there's a wonderful piece, just less than a page, of the main character proposes a project with a character in the book named Bird. Essentially a melding of a coffee table book. My writing, your paintings, and let's do a thing. Let's publish a book. And the notion of appropriation is dealt with succinctly, respectfully, and it's the native voice. It's the character Bird that says, wait a minute, you want to do this with my stuff? Well, okay. Once you put it like that, gee, I guess that sounds kind of bad. And he backs off and says, look, let's do this, but here are my rules, which is pretty much how it should be done, isn't it?
Yes, and I did basically draw the ideas from that part of the book from what was going on in Canada at the time, with authors who had misstepped in that way and then backtracked and figured out a more respectful process to maybe consult with different Indigenous voices to take that kind of work, to be more careful about that kind of work. So I kind of wrote that in like a meta story within the story of how to try to respectfully tackle this issue of appropriation.
And you even had a little fun with that in the book. Well, anyway, read the book. But the whole thing was very, as the entire book is, the whole thing was written with, in that idea, was written with reverence and respect. And you even had a little fun with it. Nicely done. It's a subject now that is, as you say, needs to be handled sensitively and with some respect. And you nailed it right out of the box. Nice.
Thank you.
You have a bit of news. Speaking of writing and agents and the career path and all that good stuff. What's going on?
Well, thank you. Oh, breaking news. So, I mean, it's kind of a long story for people who don't understand the process. I mean, I know you understand, but for viewers who might not understand the process of how the behind the scenes things work in the literary world, but getting an agent is key in a lot of ways to getting published by one of the big publishers. But it's also incredibly difficult, and the numbers game is just so depressing. So I was querying my latest book to American agents, and I was just signed by an amazing American agent. But to put it in perspective, she receives between 200 and 700 queries from authors like me who send them a sample of their book and a synopsis every week. She gets 200 to 700 of these authors begging for her to sign them, and she's slowly chosen 10 authors. She wants to keep her roster very small, and she chose me. So I'm beyond thrilled, and I feel like this is going to open a lot of doors for me. And she's the type of agent who takes an author on for her entire career. So now I'm working with this woman, hopefully, for the rest of any books that I write. So I could not be more excited about this.
Okay. Yeah, there's a little, congratulations. Wow.
Thank you.
There's a little bit of inside baseball here, but yeah. You can authors can do it themselves. They can self-publish, and once in a very great while, blah blah blah. But mostly, well, no. It's become an article of faith that to get anything done, you're absolutely right. You got to get an agent, because an agent knows what doors to knock on and how to play the game, and it is a process and all that. Now, I did not know this is one agent out of, I don't know, dozens, hundreds, many.
Well, hundreds in the States. In Canada, in my genre, there's a handful of agents who represent books. In the States, there's much more, but yeah.
Yeah, there would be, I don't know, several hundred anyway, right? It'd be huge. That agent gets between, did you say 200 and 700 manuscripts?
Well, queries. So manuscript samples. So it'll be 2 chapters and your synopsis and your bio. So this package, she gets 200 to 700 a week of those.
Okay, expressed as a percentage. Well, never mind.
Yeah, no fledgling author wants to hear these numbers. The numbers are very daunting. But
let's not do that. Nonetheless, that's a huge door to be able to get through. Wow.
It is.
So now you have an agent. It's the agent's job to farm this manuscript out to publishers. And now that doesn't mean the book is going to be published.
No. So this is the next step. And then the next step is her submitting it to publishers. But she's actually an editorial agent, which means that she's going to take my book and work with me for a few months until we get it to the place where she thinks it's as good as it can get. So that's also incredibly lucky, because not every agent is an editorial agent. Not every agent will work with you as an editor and help you improve your book. And then she will submit it to the big publishing houses in June. Wow. We hope the timeline is that happens in June, but everything's very slow. Like that happens, but then even if it was accepted, it might be close to 2 years before it hit bookshelves. Yeah.
You still have to be, wife, mother, teacher, 1,000 other things for a couple of years. But yeah, this is, and again, I don't know the economics. I'm not a writer. I leave that to the pros. But yeah, this is a huge deal. But even at the very,
I hope so.
Absolutely. Even if nothing happens in the States, you still have a Canadian agent, or is that how this works?
No, you can only have one agent at a time, but your agent can submit your books to any publishers. So she'll be submitting to American and Canadian publishers.
Okay. So even if nothing else happens, is it fair to say that Latitude 46 has the rights to the second book?
They could. Yeah, it's like an auction, it's like a bidding process. So it's open to whoever.
Yeah, there are innumerable Canadian writers. I don't know very many numbers, and I would never give them out, but a few years ago, Helen Humphreys, the Canadian author Helen Humphreys, who for my money is about as good as it gets in this country, that's only an opinion, but she had a US agent for a couple of her books and was very vocal about what it allowed her to do.
I'm sure.
Yeah, okay, now I don't have to do this. I can spend time on a book. I don't have to do all this other stuff. I don't have to teach. I don't have to this. I will, of course, because I love every writer in the world has a second gig, right? I mean, you're an
yes,
there are a lot of writers out, there are a lot of writers out there washing cabs, driving cabs, washing dishes, doing what writers have to do. But a U.S. agent, wow, that's a big get, and particularly if something happens with Simon & Schuster or Random House or whatever in the States.
That's the dream. That is really the dream, because yeah, you're right. Financially, it's a bit of a struggle, and that's an understatement as a writer, especially if you're publishing with a smaller publishing house. Financially, I mean, it's a wonderful experience in so many other ways, but that financial piece is very, very small. So yeah, the idea of maybe also being able to have that financial piece as part of the career as well that's wonderful. And just the marketing and everything else that comes along with getting a book published with a bigger publishing house. And so yeah, that's the dream. So fingers crossed.
Indeed. Does the second book have, and I think I saw a shot on your site, but does the second book have wings yet? Can you talk about it? Well, what about the second book?
Oh, well, this is the second book that she will now
Yeah.
be trying to sell. So yeah, so it's got that Gothic element similar to Watermark. It's kind of my agent is describing it as a feminine Gothic horror. So yeah, it has the darkness to it, and it's the story centers on a grieving mother who has an experience in the forest where she's presented with a kind of Faustian bargain to possibly be reunited with her daughter. So the core theme of the book is, how far will a grieving mother go to be reunited with her child? And there's an element of the supernatural in it, and parental grief and domestic suspense. There's a little bit of everything.
Nice. I will be there. I wanted to ask about that. 2 kids when Watermark was conceived, as it were. 3
Yes.
kids now. You take, pardon me, the characters, Marina,
Yes.
and Marina and Zane, and again the other the generation previous. A lot of characters in Watermark are taken to some pretty dark places, pretty dark emotional places, pretty dark physical places as well. Come to that. How does a writer compartmentalize? Oh, gee, my 6-year-old has the flu, and I've got to take this character in my book and put them through a meat grinder today. How do you?
Yeah. Yeah, compartmentalizing is exactly the right word. Yeah, because for whatever reason, I mean, I think because my life is so centered on parenting, a lot of that does come out in my books. What I choose to write about, at least in these 2 books, Watermark and this new book called The Good Mother, is both the darkness and the light of being a parent, and those horrible, morbid things that run through your mind as a parent about the worst case scenario. I've kind of chosen to explore that. And why? I'm not sure. I guess I have that darkness in me, but I think it's something that every parent can relate to, is just thinking those absolute worst case scenario thoughts, and what would happen after that. How do you deal with that?
Sure. Character Zane, the teenager in Watermark, is an emotionally complex, wounded, too smart for his own good. There's even a lightness to him from time to time. His various nicknames for his mother were wonderful, by the way. Did he arrive fully formed? Did he arrive early on? Is there a character that came first? There's something about this distraught mother, or this struggling ex, or this legend. Can you point to a thing that came first? Oh, okay, I've got something here. I realized it was a while ago. But do you remember?
I guess I mean, as a parent, I only had young kids when I wrote Watermark, so it wasn't from my own experience of parenting teenagers, but I think I drew a lot of it. I mean, I also wanted to set this book up so that there were a lot of struggles in this mother's life, and one of the struggles was dealing with a kind of prickly teenager, and her putting him in the situation of dragging him back to her past. But I think as far as drawing on that teenager, I think I did a lot of drawing on old memories of when I was a teenager, and just the types of teenagers I was surrounded by, and just kind of remembering what teenagers were like. And so, yeah, I mean, I think writers are always just using all sorts of memories and episodes of spying on people or overhearing things to kind of use that all as grist for the mill when you're creating a character. But I do think a lot of snippets came to me of certain like angry young men in my past, I guess.
Okay. Let's go back to the newish agent for a bit. An editorial agent. Now, this is someone who works, does a line edit or works with the manuscript in front of them, as opposed to just farming it out to various publishers. This one you said does both.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah,
so she, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, so she does like editing in 2 steps. So she'll read the book and do what she calls a conceptual edit, where she looks at the big picture ideas and the problems with like the plot or the characters. And we work together as you would with an editor to solve those bigger problems and strengthen the book like from a bird's eye view. And then she takes it again and does a line edit, even when she's looking specifically at each line to tighten it. So she does a lot. That's a ton of work.
The writers are full of stories, and I've always found this fascinating, of the nature of the relationship to their editor. How intimate it is, how much of a struggle it is. Sometimes there are fistfights. Tell me about, I'm so sorry, the name Matt Haiti, H-E-I-T-I? Haiti. This is another name in Watermark. Now, Matt got the final, not the final edit, but did the final read? What was that?
So Matt was the editor who was contracted through Latitude 46. So he was my official editor once I signed with the publisher, and he was amazing as well. I have, from the limited experience I've had working with editors, I'm in awe that authors have this opportunity. Like it's like having the most supportive mind working on your stuff with you as a teammate. Like I could not be more overjoyed to get the chance to work with a good editor. And so I've had a few amazing editors now, which is so lucky. And I know I have heard other authors talk about how intimidating it can be or frustrating to work with an editor, but both of those editors who I've worked with they don't work that way. They're very gentle and kind and sensitive and not insulting at all. They know how to tactfully critique your work. So I just, the first time I worked with an editor, my mind was blown. Like, this exists? Like, you can have someone just spend hours thinking about your book and help you? Like, it's because, I mean, writing is so lonely, right? You're in a room all by yourself for like hundreds of cumulative hours just focusing on this thing with no insight from anyone else. So to have this experienced professional set of eyes on it, just like spending their time thinking about your book, just felt like the greatest gift.
Absolutely. Wow. That's fantastic. So we now have, a young mother, an educator, who has put together a rock solid first book and now has a shot at, I guess, a U.S. contract.
Yeah.
Talent is at the center of all this. Of course, luck is the residue of design, so they say, but it helps a lot to get good. Jennifer, thank you very much for taking the time today. I look very much forward, and I think booksellers everywhere on this day of all days are going to look very much forward to the second book. Does it have a title?
Yes. Sorry. It's called The Good Mother.
Okay. Excellent. And if all goes well, and I realize it's, this COVID, everything, a couple of years from now, maybe?
I guess, like, we're submitting it this summer to publishers. So after that, the timeline is out of my hands. Maybe a year and a half to 2 years. I'm not really sure. Hopefully, or yeah, you just never know.
Well, I think that wraps it up, folks. Thank you
Well,
very
thank
much
you
for.
so much for having me. I've really enjoyed speaking with you yet again, David. It's always a pleasure.
Jennifer, thank you very much. The book Watermark is out now, obviously. It has been for a few years. It may well be the stepping stone to a really solid career. And you know what? Even if it's not, although it probably will be, this is the one to have, kids. Pick it up.
Thank
Folks,
you.
thank you very much.
Thank